at this time, and we are going to be in John chapter 9. We're going to look at the whole chapter because it's a story that goes all together. So it's a 41 verses, but it doesn't take too long to read. But if we just chop it off, it's not going to make any sense whatsoever. So I've got to put the whole thing together. So John chapter 9, and it begins with Jesus, and it says, "And as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?' And Jesus answered, 'It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world.' And when he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes. And he said to him, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,' which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. And therefore the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a baker were saying, 'Is not this the one who used to sit and beg?' Others were saying, 'This is he.' Still others were saying, 'No, but he is like him.' And he kept saying, 'I am the one.' And so they were saying to him, 'How then were your eyes opened?' And he answered, 'The man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to Siloam and wash. And so I went away and washed, and I received sight.' They said to him, 'Where is he?' And he said, 'I do not know.' And they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. And now it was the Sabbath, and on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. And then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, 'He applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see.' And therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, 'This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath.' But others were saying, 'How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?' And there was a division among them. And so they said to the blind man again, 'What do you say about him since he opened your eyes?' And he said, 'He is a prophet.' And the Jews then did not believe it of him, and that he had been blind and he had received sight, until they called the parents of the very one who had received sight, and questioned them, saying, 'Is this your son who you say was born blind? Then how does he now see?' And his parents answered them and said, 'We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself.' His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. For the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, 'He is of age, ask him.' So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, 'Give glory to God, we know that this man is a sinner.' And then he answered, 'Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see.' So they said to him, 'What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?' And he answered them, 'I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You do not want to become his disciples too, do you?' They reviled him and said, 'You are his disciple, but we are the disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from.' The man answered and said to him, 'Well, he is here. Well, here is an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing.' They answered him, 'You were born entirely in sins, and you are teaching us?' So they put him out. And Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, 'Do you believe in the Son of Man?' And he answered, 'Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?' And Jesus said to him, 'You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you.' And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, we are not blind too, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, we see, your sin remains. There's a lot going on in this back and forth between Jesus and the blind man and the Jewish authorities, his parents, and this man who now can see was blind, and Jesus. And there are a couple of things I want to look at in this text, so we can understand a few things of what Jesus is doing, what Jesus is teaching here. And the first one where I want to start is those verses 3 and 4 of chapter 9, with that first encounter with Jesus, when Jesus said about this man that they find blind. His disciples asked, right, this question. Like, okay, why is he blind? Is it because of his sin, or did his parents sin? And we notice Jesus' answer, and he says, it's neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it's day. Night is coming when no one can work. So Jesus, what he's doing is within this question of the disciples, because it was widely believed then, just as it's widely believed now, that those who sin will be punished, in the sense of we see somebody's done something and God is actively punishing them in their life on earth. And what Jesus is doing is he's showing that this isn't true. We look into the Old Testament. This is a lot like the book of Job is all about. As his friends are saying, you must have done something wrong for God to punish you this way. And he's like, no, I'm innocent. I haven't done anything wrong. It's kind of this idea you've done some sin, and God is now punishing you for that. And so Job is written against this idea. Jesus is speaking as he's teaching his disciples, like, this is not how God operates and what God does. And so there's this question: is the man's born blind for what? What is going on here? And some of the translations in the Bible add some stuff to it, like this man is born blind because, which is not in the text. And so people are trying to kind of put in their own thing, and various versions of Scripture are going to say something different. So it almost kind of says like, okay, Jesus is saying that his parents didn't sin, he didn't sin, but he was born blind so God can show off, in a sense. Like later on, at this moment, God can do something, and so this is why he was born blind. And that's not what's going on at all either. It's like God's not doing things so God can show off and do something later. So Jesus is not endorsing that idea in here. What Jesus is seeing, what Jesus is teaching, and what he's letting us know, it's not these consequences in life of those children born with certain conditions is not a result of sin. And what Jesus does with them, his disciples, when they say, was this man or his parents born blind? He doesn't answer the question. He doesn't say yes or no or who it was. He really doesn't answer the question. He doesn't give an explanation for the blindness. And there is a lesson for us in that. The blindness is not given an explanation. There's not an explanation Jesus doesn't give of where it comes from. But for us, I know we always ask these questions just like they do. It's like, why did this happen, right? Why was someone born this way? Why did I get cancer? Why? Right? Wait, we can just do these things, and we'll get into that mindset of why these things. Is it because I have done something? Is it because I've done something that I have this? Or going through this? What is it? What am I being punished for? And we will question that, and we'll ask ourselves these things. And Jesus is reassuring to us that this is not how God operates. This is not what's going on in your life per se. Because we are always trying to look like, here's cause and effect, right? If I have this, or they're born this way, or this is going on, what's the cause? What's the effect of that? Because we need a logical explanation. Why do I have cancer? Why was the child born blind? Why does my child have autism? Why, just we can go through all these different things, and we need an explanation. Now, sins can lead to consequences, right? You can have an alcoholic mother drinking while she's pregnant, and of course the sins, the disregard for life of that mother will affect the baby as it will be born with a fetal alcohol syndrome and have brain damage. I mean, those things do happen, but we need to go back and say, because of these things, what did I do? How did I sin, or those things for me to be in this situation? What Jesus is teaching, when things happen that we really can't explain, why born blind, why the cancer, why these things, Jesus is saying, accept it. Accept it. Accept where you're at. Accept what is going on in the sense of, now this is here, this is present, this is something that you are going to have to deal with. Now what? Now what? And that's what Jesus is kind of getting us to focus on, because he says there in verse 4, we must work the works of him who sent me as long as is day, because night is coming when no one can work. So given the blindness, where do we go from here? We go, what Jesus is saying here, we go and do the work of God. So whatever condition we find ourselves in, we go and do the work of God. As things happen and things come up in our lives, or things just seem to be a certain way, it's like, no, once I do this or I have this, no, we go and do the works of God within what God has given us, whatever those situations that we find ourselves in. And so that's one lesson here. And that's one that can get a lot of controversy depending on your Bible translation. And so that's why I wanted to start it with that. But the other thing that's going on here is this, again, contrast between light and darkness that we see throughout this Gospel of John. When it opens up in the beginning of this Gospel, we see in chapter 1 this contrast between light and darkness. And Jesus is the light, and Jesus is bringing light into the world. We've already studied another healing of someone who has had issues and has been brought back to life, in a sense of Jesus restoring them. And then through here in chapter 9, as we go through these verses of 1 through 41, we see that Jesus is the light of the world again. And Jesus, again, says one of those statements showing his divinity, showing who he is, as he says, I am light of the world. He said this before, back in chapter 8, verse 12, where Jesus says, it was speaking, says, I am the light of the world, and he who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so this healing of this blind man fits into what Jesus is teaching about himself, that he is the light of the world. And what we see with the light that Jesus brings has various effects. It brings both sight and it brings blindness. Back in the opening of the gospel, as he talks, as John writes, that Jesus is bringing the light, but men want to stay in the darkness, right? Because they don't want to be exposed. This light that Jesus is bringing has that effect of keeping people in darkness and bringing people to the light. They can stay in blindness and be blinded, in a sense, by the light of Christ, or have their eyes open and receive the sight because of the light of Jesus Christ. And so we have this story, which I read, where this man's being healed. He's being brought sight. He is blind. And this man's sight increasingly develops through the story. It's amazing. Just as he starts seeing, not physically, he's seeing physically, but he also starts seeing spiritually. He starts seeing who Jesus is. And there's this progression that at first Jesus is just a man, right? It's the man who healed me. I don't know who he is or where he came from or anything about him. I don't know if he's a sinner, but really if you think logically about it, why would God allow a sinner to do these things? And so he's in that debate that he's having with the leaders of his religious leaders of his community. But he says, like, he's the man who healed me. And then he goes and starts talking like he is a prophet. That's a big deal. Again, someone sent by God to tell us what the will of God is. And what prophets did is they would come and they say, you are doing these things wrong, and God's judgment is coming, right? And so here Jesus is bringing this idea of what is happening that is not in the God's will amongst his people, and here's the right path to God. This is what you're believing about God, like in the sense of sin, which is incorrect, and I'm going to teach you the real things of God and who God really is. I'm going to give you the real picture of that God is love, that God is your Father, and give that idea and that image and that motif that you could have this closeness to him, that he's not someone far off and just kind of squishing and squashing people when they do the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong moments, right? And zap, and you're gone. And it's just like, no, he's a loving Father. He's one who is cares and knows everything about you, all the hairs on your head, and cares for the birds and knows everything about them. And how much is he going to care about you? He's teaching all this stuff about God that is new and refreshing, and just great understanding of who God is. And so he says he's just a guy that heals me. He is a prophet. He's talking about he's from God. And then we see that final when he really sees that he is the Son of Man. He has that interchange with Jesus, and he's the one who's in front of you. And he has true belief. And he worships Jesus. He worships Jesus. And so we see in this progression of someone who is blind, who now can see. And it's not just physically, he can really see who Jesus is. And then we have these others. We have, as they start out as the Pharisees, and then they move through to just the people in opposition to Jesus. And so I'll just call them the authorities, or the religious authorities of this community. And they clearly have this evidence of healing. But they're convinced, because how Jesus goes about healing, that Jesus is a sinner. He broke the Sabbath. And so they're being portrayed in opposition to this man who is blind. They're being portrayed as ones who are following their father Moses. It's like, we have the law, we have the scriptures, we teach them, we understand them, we know what is right, we know what is good for you, we know what the things you need to do to please God, and this guy is not doing the things that please God, and so he's a sinner. He's broken the Sabbath law of God, commandment. And what John is saying, these guys are blind. They're blind. They cannot see. They cannot understand the actions of God. Or we read, we see, we know, and John is saying, and Jesus is saying, you don't. You don't. And this is the function of light. As there, the light of God is amongst them, the actions of God are happening, they're blinded by the light. They can't see. They don't understand. I'll tell you a story of, I know some of you know, when I was little, I was in an accident. I was in a car that didn't hold up well by being hit by a train. So I was in the hospital for a long time when I was a kid. And when I was released and walking out, I'd been indoors for such a long time, and those doors opened up. It was, I don't know, the afternoon. I was just totally blinded by walking out and stepping out, because I hadn't seen the bright sun and been in that bright sunlight in a long time. Just blinded. I couldn't see. It scared me a lot. It's like, oh no, what's wrong now? Because I'd been through all this trauma. I don't know if you've gone to the snow or gone skiing. It's just the sun coming off the snow and the light, and you need to make sure you have sunglasses on. You got the protection of light, because you can go snow blind. Or you're driving down the highway, one of those 2-lane highways at night, and somebody has their high beams on, and you can't see. You're blinded by the light. This is one of the things that the light of Jesus does, and this is what is being explained, that people with a certain worldview and how they think God should be and what God is doing will be blinded by the things of God. They won't see the things of God. And so we have here a blind man at the beginning of the story, and at the end of the story, he can see both physically and spiritually. And we have these Pharisees, these religious authorities, who can see physically, but by the end of the story, they are spiritually blind. And so we see in here Jesus creating tension. There's tension of what he's doing, because he's gone and he's healed this blind man on the Sabbath. He has authority to heal on the Sabbath. And he says, we do these things, and I'm doing these things because the work of God happens now. The work of God happens now. And they're turning around, these Pharisees, saying, well, this is a violation. You don't have the authority to do these things. These are not from God. You're an opponent of God because you are breaking the Sabbath, because healing on the Sabbath is work. Making mud in the dirt is work. And so you're not from God. Their worldview was fixed. We see this in this lens of legalism, where they're approaching the scriptures and what can and cannot be, where they, in their worldview, is preventing them from seeing God. They're trying to make Jesus fit into their existing worldview. Healing on the wrong day becomes opposition toward God. And we see the guy that's healed as he discusses these things with them. He keeps pushing back. He's just like, where they find, like, you're a sinner, get out of here, right? You're like, we are the authorities. We know what God is doing and what God wants, because we've read Moses. Jesus does not agree with their worldview. And when we look at how we look at the world and what our own worldview is it something that cannot accommodate what God is doing? That's a serious question for us to look as we look at this story. And what Jesus is getting us to look at is do you have such a worldview? You can say, I know the scriptures, I've been to Sunday school all my life, right? And I know these things, I know what he's doing, but you've created such a worldview within religion, in this religion context, that now you cannot see God and what God is doing. That you can't house what God is doing. That's like, God wouldn't do this because it's like all these things, just like these Pharisees are approaching this whole thing with Jesus. In the other Gospels, Jesus talks about and asks the question when he heals on the Sabbath, like, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And the answer, well, yes, but they try to go after him on actually healing and bringing people back, right, in life and all these things. And they'd be looking at like, well, the man was blind, his life is not in danger. You could wait a day and do God's work when it's the right time, when it's approved by us, when these things. And for Jesus, what Jesus is saying, I've alluded to this throughout this lesson, is to Jesus, now is always the time. Now is always the time. And so we look at our worldview, and how is our worldview when it comes to the things of what God is doing as Jesus? Is it holding us back because it's not the right time? Or this is not how God works and operates and does? And so we won't do, or I won't see, I can't see what God is doing. And for Jesus, what he's teaching us is do the will of God today, this moment, at this time. This is the right time. This is the right time. No matter what the day is, now is always the right time. Now is always the right time to give life. Now is always the right time to restore life. Now is always the time to do the things and the actions in the will of God. Now is the right time. This is the way we keep Sabbath, in a sense. Going looking at the story, by keeping life. Not in violation by exercising and driving out the will, but looking and seeing what is God doing. What is the divine will of God doing at this moment, at this time, and being obedient to God's will. And the problem is not that the lawbreakers and their worldviews and what is not being allowed and what they'll see and what God is. It really is coming down to how and when are we going to be able to see what God is doing, because they're not. And so they can't rejoice and be part of and celebrating what God is doing. And so for us, we can see, am I not seeing what God is doing? Because when somebody comes along and does something, and we say, well, I don't know if that's from God or not, rather than taking it back and see, like, okay, is it helping? Is it restoring? Is it giving life? Is it within the parameters of what God has said and what Jesus is doing? Am I being envious that they're doing this and I'm not? It's like, look at what are we not celebrating in the church and what people are doing? Because our worldview is stopping us from celebrating, seeing what God is doing in other people's lives and how God is restoring and bringing life and doing these things. So in all this is what Jesus, in this story, in what he's doing with this blind man, is getting us to see, to start questioning as we put ourselves in this. Really, what is our worldview? How are we thinking about sin and what God does? How are we thinking about the things that God is doing good? And are we recognizing them, seeing them? And so it's a challenge for us to see, to re-examine and to look, like, am I on board with what God is doing? Or am I fighting against? You definitely don't want to be fighting against what God is doing. And that's why it's important for us to look and to study and to pray and be part of community in seeing what God is doing amongst us.